Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Rob Spera's film Leprechaun in the Hood, or Leprechaun 5. You might be forgiven, based on the title Leprechaun in the Hood, for assuming that this film is going to be racist. It's not racist, I'll say that. It's not as racist as I was expecting it to be. So, this is a 2000 blaxploitation film, which is sort of an interesting thing, because often we think of like the peak of blaxploitation as the 70s, right? And by about 2000, we feel like maybe people should know better. But this is still set in a world that sort of deals with like pimps and gangs and things like this, the way that much classic blaxploitation from the 70s does, but it's updated for the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and so it more than revolving around sort of 70s pimp culture, it revolves around rap primarily, and rap as an industry, interestingly enough. So we have sort of four. All right, so apart from the Leprechaun, we've got the one individual central character and then a group of three friends. We got Mac Daddy Onassis, played by Ice-T. He is seemingly a former pimp, possibly still a pimp. So there is, like, in the opening scene, he is in this sort of 70s blaxploitation pimp getup, which is probably a nod to the general genre of this film. And then there's this trio of young men who want to become professional rappers. Postmaster P, Stray Bullet, and Butch. Butch is the DJ, and Postmaster P and Stray Bullet are the actual rappers. What has allowed Mac Daddy Onassis to accrue his wealth, power, success, and his seeming position at the top of the music industry, the rap industry in LA, is that at some point, again seemingly in the 70s based on the clothing, he and his friend Slug had found the Leprechaun's treasure, and Mac Daddy took a flute. I hold up my hand like that as there's a flute there that you can see. No, but so he took this flute, and there's a magical flute that basically allows a kind of hypnosis, and then seemingly imbues the user with incredible musical talent. The Leprechaun is not that keen on the flute being stolen because, as we learn in all of the other Leprechaun films, the number one thing you can do to get yourself killed is to steal his gold. So, the trio of aspiring rappers are basically sort of belittled by Mac Daddy, who had dangled before them the prospect of a record contract, but then when he actually hears their rapping, which is all about, it's very sort of positive, and it's about sort of good messages and unity and things like this, he's basically like, no, get out, you suck, I hate you. So they decide they're going to rob him and go to this contest in Las Vegas, this rap contest in Las Vegas. So they rob him, and Postmaster P steals the flute. Now, this is actually one of the things that I find really interesting about this film. And I actually think in many ways Leprechaun in the Hood is a better film than Leprechaun 2, 3, and 4 Lost in Space. Because there's actually kind of an interesting storyline here. It really revolves around the crisis of conscience experienced by Postmaster P. He wants very desperately to be a sort of good, honest, upstanding, ethical person. He doesn't want to get into the gangsta lifestyle. He doesn't want to rob people. He doesn't want to treat women badly. He doesn't want to do any of these things. He wants wholesome rap to be successful, and he wants to live a wholesome life. But he is pulled into crime by Stray Bullet, who is much more dedicated to becoming successful as a rapper, regardless of what it takes. And so Postmaster P has to sort of reconcile himself throughout this film to what ethical lines he is willing to cross in order to achieve his dream. And I actually think that storyline is quite good, and we don't really have any sort of interesting equivalent moral conundrum in the previous 3 films. So I actually think even in the first Leprechaun film, we don't have a comparable moral conundrum, but that's just a better film in and of itself than the second, third, and fourth entries in the franchise. But I think there's a lot of stuff that is not great about Leprechaun in the Hood, but there's actually a core storyline here that feels like it has weight, it has purpose, and it gives the film coherence. Because Postmaster P has to balance his desire for wholesomeness and behaving properly against the ambitions of Stray Bullet, but he also has to balance it against these other 2 competing forces of Mac Daddy, who wants to get the flute back and kill them, and the Leprechaun, who wants to get the flute back and kill them, right? So it becomes not just a dilemma of ethical action, but a dilemma of survival as well. And the fact that those 2, the dilemma of survival and the dilemma of proper ethical action, are interconnected for Postmaster P, I think actually makes the film much more interesting than the previous entries in the Leprechaun franchise. So again, I think I think that's interesting. I think it's fun, and it works because the characters develop a kind of coherence. That being said, I talked extensively about this in my video on Leprechaun 4 in Space. One of the things that is both delightful and irritating about the Leprechaun franchise is that after the first film, it increasingly abandons the idea of coherence at all. By the time we get to Leprechaun 4, there is basically no in-universe rules that govern what makes this a coherent franchise, apart from there's the Leprechaun, you steal his gold, he kills you or tries to kill you. That's it. Right? Nothing else makes sense, nothing else is connected, nothing else follows. And Leprechaun in the Hood is not an exception to that. We get this right from the beginning of the film, actually, where Mac Daddy Onassis and Slug break into what seems to be sort of an underground, almost like a bricked off basement or cellar something like that. Possibly some sort of like industrial space. It's not real clear. The fact that there's steam pipes that Mac Daddy uses eventually to fight the Leprechaun suggests maybe an industrial space, but it's not real clear what this place is. But they basically use like pickaxes to break in through the wall. And they find a table with some fast food and a 6-pack of beer on it. Why is that there? No idea. What is the? We don't know what this space is, so it's not clear why there's food here at all. Apparently, Slug had promised Mac Daddy riches if they broke into this place. Why would he think there were riches there? No idea. Why would Mac Daddy believe him? No idea. None of that background is really given. Mac Daddy gets upset that the only things that they can see are fast food and a 6-pack of beer, so he like throws Slug through another wall, beyond which they see the Leprechaun petrified because this is a minor continuity. The medallion from Leprechaun 3 is around the Leprechaun's neck. So we know from Leprechaun 3 that medallion will petrify the Leprechaun, turn him into a statue. Why does it do that? We have no idea. That's never explained in Leprechaun 3 or in this movie. It's simply a thing. How did the Leprechaun get here? Who got the medallion around the Leprechaun's neck? Why is he in this industrial space or basement or whatever it is with his pot of gold sitting right in front of him? And why does he have a magical flute? The movie makes no attempt to provide any answers to any of these questions. It's simply a pretext for the main action to occur. So, again, there are these sort of problems of in-world coherence, where things don't make sense, they aren't explained, they aren't justified, we're simply sort of encouraged to accept the premise of this world as it exists. There are also... So there is another actually callback to a previous film, because at one point Butch buys a book on leprechauns for dummies, and determines that if they can get essence of four-leaf clover into the leprechaun's system, that will incapacitate him. And the leprechaun, by this point, this is quite late in the film, the leprechaun is very into smoking weed and seems to be into having his zombie fly girls bring him women to have sex with. So on the one hand, you've got the throwback to the four-leaf clovers element from the original Leprechaun film, right? That was the only thing that could weaken him in the original film. Good enough. So Butch laces some weed with four-leaf clovers to get the leprechaun to smoke it. On the other hand, the leprechaun is just mating with people left, right, and center does somewhat... I mean, I guess he's not marrying them, but it does somewhat sort of seem inconsistent with the rules of Leprechaun 2, in which he can take a bride every 1,000 years. But that's, I guess, a minor point here. But ultimately, this film does introduce a new component to Leprechaun lore, the thing that I don't think is based in actual Irish folklore, which is the zombie fly girls. There are 3 of them, and they're not really zombies. They are hypnotized. but they're not zombies. Because a zombie, by definition, is a reanimated corpse. In traditional Haitian voodoo, that would be a corpse that is sort of resurrected to be the slave of whoever has done the resurrecting. In much modern zombie lore, beginning, for instance, with George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, zombies are simply reanimated corpses on the hunt for victims to eat. Whatever. Regardless, these are not zombies. These women are not dead. They're just hypnotized and do the bidding of the leprechaun. The other thing that's problematic about this film is its use of trans people or drag as a source of humor. I mean, the film came out in 2000, so in 2000, it was not that uncommon necessarily to still build humor around drag or trans people or whatever it is from the perspective of 2025, where trans rights have on some fronts come a long way, and on other fronts, particularly here in the US, have really gone somewhat in reverse. But it is problematic to have media in which the joke is, oh, this is a trans person, ha ha ha, or oh, this is a person in drag, that's funny, let's make that a source of humor, because that does, of course, have real-world negative implications for how people view actual trans people and actual drag queens, drag kings, etc., etc. There is a dehumanizing component to this when we reduce any particular group to a source of humor, right? And so that's problematic in this film. And it happens on a couple of different occasions in the movie, so not ideal.